This is Anarchast.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Today I have Michael Suede of libertariannews.org with us, coming in from, actually I don't know where you are. Where are you, Michael?
I'm in Southern California.
Oh, okay. Whereabouts?
The Corona area.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. It's great to have you on. Libertariannews.org is actually one of my favorite blogs to go to. It's got tons of great information, not only about anarchy and anarcho-capitalism, but also about other things, including he also follows some of the ClimateGate stuff, and he also follows some other interesting things to do with physics, including the electric universe theory and all that sort of stuff. So I was really excited to have you on today. So thank you for coming on with us, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my pleasure.
It's our pleasure as well, and I always start this with every new guest who we haven't had on before. I always like to ask right off the bat, how did you become an anarchist?
I became an anarchist, I guess, through a progression of learning that kind of all got started when I watched Ron Paul run for the 2007 Republican presidential nomination. And he started talking about Austrian economics, and just the things he was saying made so much sense. Everything, it was so logical, and I'm the kind of guy that, I really do want to keep my own money, and isn't it more conservative to, try to reduce government spending? And I got what Ron Paul was saying. It just sounded so logical to me. And when he started talking about Austrian economics, I started digging a little bit, and I found the Mises Institute, and I started watching some of their videos. And after that, the logic was so clear to me that it couldn't be refuted. You can't argue against it if you're going to use rational logic to base your opinions, your political opinions on. So that's really what got the ball rolling, and from there it was just it became clear to me that the private market could provide the security necessary to secure property rights, and that the government really was completely unnecessary. There's really nothing that the government, a coercively funded government, is necessary for. So.
Yeah, and didn't you say you have a military background? I
do. I have. I'm formerly a U.S. Navy serviceman. Actually, I served time in the Gulf, and I guess I've always been kind of neo-conny, more pro-Republican kind of a guy. I was kind of just always been that way, and because I knew socialism was bad. I knew the free market was the engine that brought prosperity to America, and I guess it really wasn't until after watching Ron Paul and really getting it that I really kicked all the way over from libertarian, from minarchist libertarian all the way over to anarchy, and now I'm happy to say that I reject the use of coercive violence to fund the state.
That's great. And was there any books or anything in particular that kind of helped you along that path?
The biggest, I think, thing was the Mises Institute videos. Actually, I love watching all of their videos. Every lecture they give is just absolutely fantastic, and I love it because I like to read the websites and suck down other information as I'm watching the videos at the same time, so it's really convenient.
Yeah, I agree totally. I love Mises.org and LewRockwell.com. Those are sort of my two favorite websites to go to, both basically run by the same guy, Lew Rockwell,
right.
Who's an amazing guy.
He sure is.
We've had him on Anarchast before, and he's just an amazing guy. That was a real honor to have him on. But I really loved your blog. It's one of my favorite blogs, and the reason is because you've got such interesting insights, and also from all sorts of different angles on different things. And one of your most recent posts that I really enjoyed was you were pointing out, and this is something I love because as anarchists we get asked this a lot. We get asked, well, what would we do without the police? Without the government running the police? And I've got different answers for that, but when I saw the statistics that you had on your blog post, that's going to help me so much to explain to people, because I'll let you explain, but basically you were saying that there's twice as many private police in the US, or twice as much money is spent on private police than is spent on actual government police in the US.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And most people don't even realize the private security that surrounds them on a daily basis, and I guess if you really look at it, it's absolutely staggering. Public university, well, maybe not the public universities, but the private universities certainly have private police forces. I was formerly a public safety officer for a major university. And you couldn't tell the difference between me and a cop. I wore a badge, the whole 9 yards. The bars all have private security, bouncers at the nightclubs, everywhere. The malls, the shopping malls, the banks. Banks use private security to transport money. Port security is often private, and we forget that prior to the TSA, all the airport security was private as well. So and obviously the TSA is completely unnecessary. It's absolutely ridiculous what they've done, and why shouldn't we go back to having a private system where we don't have to be molested by these crazy agents? So, yeah.
Oh, I agree completely. I know I get patted down so much at the Phoenix airport that I know the guy who pats me down by name. So I just want to say hi to Joe and thanks for my pat downs. And you know, it's just crazy what's going on. But yeah, that's excellent points, and it's really interesting to see. And it's interesting because you point out the TSA, which has only been around for I think a little less than 10 years now, and you know, so you can actually point that out to people and say, hey, look, we didn't used to need the government to run the security at the airports, but you know, because it's only 10 years ago, I think people can kind of see that. But because they've seen only the government run the official police force, that they can't really get their heads around that. But your article was excellent because it kind of shows and proves that most policing is actually private already, and really most of the government policing is mostly just speeding tickets and taserings and beatings and you know, just all sorts of horrible things. Like you never hear too many people actually ever complain about a private security guard. You never hear about private security brutality or anything like that, because those guys would get fired very quickly because that's a free market system. But so your article was excellent on that. And I also want to talk about some of your other articles. You recently wrote about ClimateGate. Are you interested in that whole angle
yeah,
as well?
absolutely. I've been following this very closely. In fact, I've even made videos myself, and I've written several articles on this subject. And it's so clear to me that if you just do a little bit of digging, that this whole notion of having the state come in and manage a problem that doesn't even exist by just hoarding vast sums of money and spending it on these crazy project ideas and climate scientists, that one, even if the Earth was warming, there's no reason to believe that the private individuals in a private market couldn't negotiate these issues. Like they couldn't come up with private solutions to these issues voluntarily. Because if things got bad enough, people would seek out solutions to those whatever problems arose with the climate. But more to the point, it's clear that these the scientists who are engaged in promoting this climate alarmism, I like to call it, have an agenda. And if there was no problem, if the Earth was not warming, well, they would lose all their funding. It's all government funded. So they have a very strong incentive to promote this agenda because it keeps the funds flowing into their pockets. So, and if you do a little bit of digging, it's clear that this whole thing is predicated on a lot of assumptions that look completely bogus to me, at least to the way I view it. There's you can see that they're manipulating the data sets, leaving data out of the data sets that would refute their position. So they have all this proxy data that they're combining to generate these temperature data sets. It's all based on a computer model, which is completely, it's kind of like modeling the economy. We know Keynesians model the economy, and it's completely ridiculous, you know, how they do it, because you can't model all the possible interactions that come up within a market economy. It can't be done. And the same thing is true with the climate. So they have to use a lot of assumptions to be able to make their climate models come out the way they want them to. And you can manipulate these things by manipulating the data that you put into them to give you any result that you really want. And so they do. They put in the data in such a way as to promote their agenda. And this latest round of emails that was just released, you can see the climate scientists themselves call it the cause. You know, we need to support the cause. It's a religious or political type of movement. It has nothing to do with science and everything to do with making sure the money keeps flowing into their pockets.
Totally. When I pay attention to some of this, as a rational person, if you just think about it, it makes no sense right from the get-go. We've had historically periods that were much warmer than today, and we've had periods that obviously with ice age is much, much colder. So just on the basic theory of that, on that very basis, the fact that they're saying that we're at the warmest point, we're causing the world to warm right now. Well, what caused the world to warm in the medieval
all the cavemen were
warming
driving around
period?
with SUVs, apparently, right?
Yeah. So even for the very basics, it makes no sense. And just the fact that they chose CO2, which is the air that we breathe out of our mouths, as something to be taxed, kind of, I think, really shows what kind of sick, deranged individuals are coming up with these things. People like Al Gore. I really appreciate Al Gore invented the internet, but after that, he's gone totally downhill ever since then, and now he's a complete sick. You just look at him and how bloated he is, and he's a disgusting, sick individual, and it's just terrible. And I try to watch some of those TED Talks, and not all the TED Talks are all that bad. Some of them are okay, but every single one starts off with a picture of Al Gore, and I have to cringe every time. I just have to fast forward through that part.
He's a profiteer. Hopefully people can see that now. The guy's living in multi-million-dollar mansions, spending tens of thousands of dollars a year on his electrical bills. It should be clear that this whole he has no real belief in this system. If he did, he'd be trying to conserve energy and resources himself, but he's not. He flies around in private jets and does all sorts. It's just a complete hypocrite. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, and it's amazing how much government has really taken over the sciences in many ways, thanks to their funding. So like you just pointed out, they really own this climate deal because they give all the funding to these scientists. So these scientists just find every single way they can to kind of show that there is warming so they can continue to get funding. And we're seeing that all over the place with things like cancer research and HIV/AIDS, which really in some ways doesn't even really exist. That's a complete myth and scam in so many ways. Cancer, there's so much money in the cancer business, mostly coming in from governments and pseudo-government agencies, that they have no real reason or no motivation to actually cure cancer. And most of the cancer cures that come out get squashed very quickly from the cancer industry. So this is what happens when we live in a statist world. This is how things get skewed. It's just terrible how things can be turned so upside down, but that's just another case. And yeah, go ahead.
I'd say that's a lot of the pharmaceutical industry suppressing competition through regulation. It's a great example of that. We can see people like if you haven't seen Brzezinski the movie, you have to watch that. It will blow your mind. It's about a doctor who basically came up with a cure for all sorts of different kinds of cancer, and he patented his process, but he can't. The way the FDA structured the FDA's regulations are structured, he's unable to sell his idea or promote his idea to anyone outside of his state, anyone that's outside of his direct his direct clientele. So he, as a doctor himself, can issue his own methods of medication, but he cannot distribute that to other facilities. Like, other people can't copy that. Other people can't buy his patents. Obviously, I disagree with patents, but he can't distribute that around because the FDA regulations strictly prevent it. And the FDA itself attacked him over and over and over again, trying to discredit his research, trying to sue him in court for violating the regulations. And he's won every time, because every time he just brings in all the clients that he's cured, and the jury looks at him and looks at the prosecutor and goes, "You're crazy. What are you doing? This guy obviously found a cure, and you're prosecuting him." It's absolutely ridiculous. And you're right. It's all because of the state. We would have cures for cancers, cures for all sorts of diseases spread throughout, because the market would choose the best one. But the market's not allowed to choose the best one because of all the regulations and insanity placed upon it by the state.
Yes. There's actually a company down here in Mexico. It's an American company. They say that they've basically got various ways to treat and cure cancer, but they weren't allowed to operate in the U.S., so they had to come down here to a much more free country, Mexico. Right. But of course now they're running all sorts of drugs, sort of guns and all sorts of things with Fast and Furious, Barack Obama and all those criminals are running guns into Mexico every day, trying to destabilize Mexico because there is quite a bit of freedom here. And of course, what do they say on the news in the U.S. is that Mexico is a terrible place, don't go there, it's very scary. I'm here to tell you it's not that scary. I've been a lot more scared in the U.S. on many occasions than I have in Mexico. But that's just how these statist things work. And the really bad part is they take our money to use against us. So that's why they're such a difficult opponent, is because they take about half of everyone's money, and then they can use that against us, so they can pay off scientists and pay off all sorts of people to get rid of all of these good things that we would want, just to justify their own crazy sociopathic ideas and power-grabbing ideas that they want to do. So it's just terrible. And I actually wanted to talk about something completely different with you, something that you alerted me to. Some people who follow my Dollar Vigilante blog might remember an article I wrote about Einstein and the electric universe. I actually first heard about that from your blog, and I know you're a big, I don't know, proponent, but a big fan, or I know you're really into what that idea is about, and it's very interesting. And why don't you go ahead and explain your thoughts on the electric universe theory?
Sure. Well, if people are interested in getting a good primer on the electric universe, they should just Google Thunderbolts of the Gods, and you can get a YouTube video. There's also a Google video of it. It's all free. Watch Thunderbolts of the Gods, and that will give you a great primer as to what plasma cosmology entails. And the gist of the theory is that space doesn't bend. You know, Einstein's general relativity is predicated on the bending of space to explain phenomena that are occurring out there in deep space. So Einstein's theories basically say, matter bends space, and that is what causes gravity, and gravity is the driving force of the universe according to Einstein's version of relativity. So that's how we get things like black holes and dark matter and such things like that, is that when astronomers look out there in space and they see these very high concentrations of energy, well, because general relativity is predicated on the bending of space, the use of gravity to create driving force, it's the only mechanism available to general relativity, is that they have to come up with these things like black holes in order to explain these large concentrations of energy. But plasma cosmology takes a different route, and it says, well, we know there is charge separation out there in space. We know there is ionized gas called plasma that pervades all of the interstellar space and even our own solar system. And all plasma is like a magnetically conductive gas. You can think of it that way. You have charge separation, so these the particles out there are charged and they respond to electric fields. They create electric fields and magnetic fields. So that is what the plasma cosmologists are saying are creating all of the phenomena that we see out there in space. It's not due to gravity, but due to the electrical force and due to the known properties of plasma. So the plasma physicists can actually go to a lab, create the phenomena in a laboratory-controlled environment using high-density plasma charges, and then extrapolate that out to the cosmos. And when they go to the lab and they create these phenomena in the lab using the plasma focus devices and what have you, and they look out there in space, they can see direct correlations between what they see in the lab and what they see in space. So they reject this notion of bending space and gravity as being the primary drivers of force out in the cosmos out there. It's not gravity, it is indeed the electrical force, and that gravity is a side property of the electrical nature of matter. So that's how the theory works, I guess, in general.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I don't know anything about physics, really. I failed out of grade 10 physics. But I failed out of most of my classes in school because I never went, and so that's why I'm actually a fairly free thinker today. I wasn't indoctrinated for too long. But when I saw that video, the video you pointed out, the Thunderbolts of the Gods, it really, a lot of it made a lot of sense to me. And as a free thinker, and having figured out a lot of the stuff in the financial world and the political world, and realizing that we're mostly all just brainwashed to think that the statist solution is correct, and that Keynesian economics is correct, and central banking is natural and normal and good and helps an economy. That gives me a perspective on other things that when I see something that makes a lot of sense, I tend to gravitate towards it. So I was very interested to see that on your blog, and I know you follow it quite a bit, so you must be quite into this sort of stuff. Do you have a background in any of this sort of stuff, or how did you get into learning about this?
Well, I just, I've always kind of had a curiosity about space and cosmology in general, and I guess I just happened upon the Thunderbolts of the Gods video when it first came out. I just got lucky, and I watched it, and it floored me. And as soon as I watched that video, I had to know more. I had to know, are these guys lying? Are these guys for real? Like, it's so incredible, and it makes so much logical sense. Cosmology today makes no logical sense. God particles and Higgs fields and, dark matter, dark energy. They're saying 95% of the matter in the universe we can't see and we can't detect because it's dark energy or dark matter. Like, what does that mean? What does that even mean? It doesn't even make any sense. And what does it mean when space bends? How can you bend nothing? If space is nothing, how can it bend? It just nothing makes any logical sense in modern cosmology today. And it's interesting to know that as anarchists, we know the Keynesian economists, the economics academia has been completely corrupted. We see all the corruption of the state in terms of climate science. I'm here to tell you that cosmology is just as corrupted and just as damaged as the other sciences that have been co-opted by these statist academics. And they all have an agenda. Again, we have NASA. Think of the billions of dollars that we've spent promoting these crazy cosmologies. We have the LIGO, the LISA, the Large Hadron Collider, just endless experiments that cost millions, sometimes billions upon billions of dollars that are being spent, money just thrown at these crazy cosmological theories. And then when you look at the results of all those experiments, the results are failures. Gravity Probe B, it failed to detect frame dragging. We have the LIGO, failed to detect gravitational waves. We have the CDMS project, failed to detect dark matter, and on and on and on. Every single time an in situ direct experiment is performed by these clowns to validate or confirm Einstein's theories, it fails. Now, this is different than what they say. Well, Einstein's theory has been proven so many different ways by so many different experiments. Well, not really. It hasn't. What they're doing is looking out in space, looking out in the cosmos, and then creating their theory around what they observe out there in space. And that's how they're proving Einstein's theories. But when they actually get into the lab and they try to test these theories against lab results, they fail repeatedly. So there is no real proof. There's not one single shred of real laboratory proof that says space actually bends. And physicists still don't even know what causes gravity. They don't know. So how can you have a theory that's entirely predicated on gravity, such as general relativity, yet not know what gravity actually is, like what causes it? They don't know. It's absolutely incredible to me. And just a little bit of scratching beneath the surface starts revealing all sorts of problems. I have an endless list of things I could talk about failures, things that the physicists said, the results of this experiment should conform to this, to general relativity, but then when the results come back, they don't match what their theories had predicted. This kind of thing. I have an endless list of that I can rattle off. It's unbelievable.
I believe you. I felt the same way when I saw that video. It seemed like so many things made so much sense, and I'd spent some time trying to look into the more accepted principles of physics and cosmology, and it didn't make any sense to me. So I just sort of left it the same way that I left economics years ago, because it didn't make any sense to me. And just from what I've discovered from the political side and from the economic side, and that most things that we're told to believe are completely wrong, and that there's no evidence of any, for example, Keynesianism. There's no evidence that it works, and in fact, there's nothing but evidence that it doesn't work, that it collapses societies, that it collapses economies, and it destroys wealth. And there's no evidence that there's anything other than that. So that's why I was really open to what you came across. So that was very interesting. So thank you for bringing that to my attention, and I'm going to definitely follow up, and I hope to have you back on Anarchast sometime very soon.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to come back on, and I hope everyone takes a chance to Google and watch Thunderbolts of the Gods, and I'm telling you, you will not be disappointed, and the theory will blow your mind. It is a very connected theory. It connects us all together. It does away with these disconnected bodies that kind of come about through when you theorize through general relativity. In the plasma cosmology world, everything is connected. The energy flows between all the cosmological bodies of the universe, and there's a connection between everything. It's a beautiful theory, and I think it's the correct theory. It is a real logical explanation for what we observe out there in space.
That's so interesting. I remember thinking about when a lot of the people thought the world was flat, and the first people who came out with the idea that the world was round, they were very castigated and hated. And back then, even the governments of the day, the kings and all those sort of people, they would torture these people. It's the exact sort of thing today. So really, it's quite amazing. We really haven't progressed that much over the last few centuries in those terms.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just telling my friend the other day, it's like we think we're so smart, we think we're so advanced, our society is barely out of the caves. It's like we're barely out of the caves, we're still beating each other with clubs, stealing each other's property to organize our societies. We have these crazy theories, religious theories of climatology and cosmology. It is this cult of the state. It is where we are just barely starting to step out of the cave. We have so much further to go, so much further to progress as a society. It's fun being on the edge to see, it's like I have these insights I can see through the anarchist economics, the distortions and lies of the state. Anarchy's really caused me to distrust everything the government tells me. Everything's a lie. It's like everything's a lie. Everything that the science teachers tell you about cosmology, economics, and the rest is just, everything's just a lie. The state just cannot help itself. It just has to lie about everything.
Yeah, and thanks to websites like yours, libertariannews.org, and things like Anarchast, and all sorts of things on the internet, we have access to this information. So for all the people out there, keep an open mind. Remember that for the most part, you have been brainwashed. We all have been, by the state and by the public school system and by the media. And there's a lot more out there to be learnt. And most of the things that we know are actually incorrect. And so do your own research and get out there on the internet. And Michael Suede, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks for being on with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Take care. And that's all we have for today. Peace, love, and energy.